Would you agree that the most important job for any president is to keep Americans safe?
I would agree.
So you said that the president's never satisfied if people don't feel safe. Does he know that after a year in office, people do not feel safe in this country?
Well, Peter, I think if we look at the facts here, we've seen a surge of crime over the last 2 years. Would you agree with that?
So what are you attributing the rise in crime to then?
Well, I think we should be responsible in how we're reporting to the public what the roles are, what the reasons for the surge in crime. Gun violence is a huge reason for the surge in crime. Underfunding of some police departments and their need for additional resources, something the president has advocated for consistently through the course of his career. That's something we know we need to take action on. And it is absolutely true that he will not be satisfied or complacent when officers are being gunned down or when Americans have to worry about whether they can safely ride the subway or bus. That should not be a political issue. He's somebody who has had a long career of many decades of fighting for funding for police departments, for local communities in order to reduce crime.
But he's been here in office for more than a year, and the murder rate is nearing a 25-year high. So why don't we see and hear more from the president about this? We hear all the time about things that you guys are doing to fight the pandemic because that is a risk to American people. A rising murder rate is a risk to American people too, right?
And he has spoken to crime. But I think what people are most focused on, as they should be, are what actions he has taken. He has unveiled a strategy to focus federal law enforcement resources on combating violent crime, offered unprecedented levels of funding through the rescue plan for cities and states to put more cops on the beat and invest in proven community anti-violence programs, something every Republican voted against. The Department of Justice has announced $139 million in grants to cities for community policing, which will put 1,000 more officers on the streets. He's also proposed doubling those grants, and he's called for an additional $750 million for federal law enforcement. He's announced a zero-tolerance policy for gun dealers who willfully sell illegal guns, and we've launched gun trafficking strike forces in New York and cities across the country. Actions are important here, and he has a long record of them.
But does the president think that any of that is working?
The president thinks you should have a plan to address crime and gun violence. He has one, and we look forward to working with people who support that effort.
But as the murder rate nears a 25-year high, would he consider maybe trying something different?
Trying something other than supporting a massive plus-up in funding from his predecessor, cracking down on gun trafficking and gun violence, which is a major driver of the violence we've seen across the country, working to support community policing programs and police departments across the country. I think most people who want to fight crime would agree that's the right approach.
Because what else would a Fox reporter want to discuss than crime? Let's be honest here, if it's not whipping its base into an absolute fear-stricken frenzy, then Fox doesn't want to talk about it. But what's especially ironic is that while Fox loves to traffic in fear porn, when it comes to actually solving the issues they wail about, well, they're just a bit less enthusiastic. Think about it. The principal issue exacerbating crime right now is the economic downturn stemming from the pandemic. Crime spikes during recessions. Even the police themselves admit that recessions fuel crime. They said it in 2008, and they said it again in 2020. And so it would make sense then that we would want to end this pandemic as fast as humanly possible. And the only way to end it is to get everyone vaccinated, which Republicans have done an incredible job undermining. So on one hand, they're complaining about the devastating consequences arising from this pandemic, and on the other hand, they're prolonging this pandemic by casting doubt on the efficacy and safety of the vaccine. So yeah, weird how it seems like the pandemic never ends. Beyond that, consider too the fact that the American Rescue Plan supplied $360 billion to state and local governments that would help fund, you guessed it, the police. And so clearly, if fighting crime is that important to Republicans, they'd have ensured that this funding would go through, right? Yeah, not so much, considering 0 Republicans voted for the bill. 0. Why? Because while they're content to complain about crime, when it comes time to actually fund the people who fight that crime, they prioritize preventing the Democrats from getting a political win over protecting their constituents. Funny how that works out, huh? Doocy goes on to equate COVID being a risk to American lives with murder being a risk to American lives. And so shouldn't the White House be as vocal about murders as it is about COVID? Right, because those two things are the same. Because you could also catch murder from someone sneezing. Here's the thing, going out during a once-in-a-generation pandemic and espousing safety measures to keep as many people from catching a highly contagious virus is not the same as trying to prevent murder. They are in no way the same, nor do they call for the same response. One's a public health emergency, and the other is rising crime rates in certain regions. And yet still Biden's taken steps to do what he can do to ensure that those crime rates do decline. Will it be the same route you need to take to contain a pandemic? Of course not. And Peter Doocy knows that, but the bad faith suggestion is the point. Also, I think it's especially funny how Peter Doocy takes a swipe at Biden here for not speaking out publicly about the murder rate, as if that's gonna do the trick. What does he want Biden to do? Come out and denounce murder? Is that what's gonna dissuade a murderer from killing someone? And that really does put on full display the difference here, because Doocy wants words while Biden took action. In other words, apparently what Peter Doocy is looking for is cheap, empty theatrics, which is actually par for the course for a Republican Party that claims to love the police while bludgeoning them with flagpoles. A party that claims to love states' rights while filing lawsuits to try to decertify election results in other states. A party that claims to be fiscally responsible while adding $7.8 trillion to the debt during the Trump administration. A party that claims to favor family values while still breathlessly backing a guy who used campaign funds to pay for the silence of women that he had affairs with. They will fall over themselves to claim support for something until it comes time to actually walk the walk. And finally, even after Jen Psaki names a whole laundry list of steps that Biden's taken to actually confront crime in response to Doocy's claims that nothing's being done, then suddenly Doocy's beef is that the stuff being done isn't the right stuff. In other words, he complains about crime and then complains about what's being done to reduce crime. And that should give you some insight here into the fact that it's not actually about the solutions, the complaining here is the point. The narrative is already written. It's that Biden's weak on crime and his policies are encouraging crime. And so Doocy will ask the question knowing full well that Fox isn't going to give any credence to Jen's answer, but instead will focus all of their attention on the accusation and just run with that. It is a conclusion in search of evidence. These press briefings are just formalities for Fox, because regardless of what happens, they'll report whatever reality they want to report. Because for the umpteenth time, Fox is not a news network, it's a propaganda outlet. And Peter Doocy's questions here make that abundantly clear. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.